Welcome to Ashley On, your one-stop podcast where we talk about health and wellness, spirituality, and all things new. Stick around as we delve deep into innovations to support a better world.
Hello, welcome back to Ashley On, where we explore the intersection of consciousness, performance, and what it really means to evolve as a human being. Today's conversation is one that I've really been looking forward to because we're diving into something deeper than just mindset or self-improvement. We're talking about the nature of reality itself. Our guest, Abke, is a spiritual teacher and the founder of 4D University, where he helps people understand the transition from ego-based living into higher states of awareness. His work bridges ancient wisdom with modern psychology, covering everything from the law of one and non-duality to shadow work and emotional integration. In a world where we're constantly optimizing our bodies and brains, Aaron brings a powerful perspective that true transformation doesn't come from doing more, but from becoming more aligned with who we really are. So today we're exploring how consciousness, the unified field, and how inner coherence might be the missing links between mental clarity, emotional freedom, and even physical well-being. Hope you enjoyed the show. Before we jump in, this episode is sponsored by Igniton, one of the most fascinating companies I've come across in the world of human performance and consciousness. What makes Igniton different isn't that they're just formulating supplements. They're working at the intersection of biology and energy. Like Tesla said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That's where Igniton stands out. It's quantum bioenergetics, and it works. Igniton products are enhanced using cold plasma and laser photonics technology to embed what they call ignitons, high-frequency subatomic quasiparticles, into nutrient compounds. The idea is to support greater biofield coherence and optimize how the body actually utilizes those nutrients. And what's interesting is that in university research, these enhanced formulations showed significant reductions on stress-related biomarkers like IL-6 or CRP or blood pressure, and greater improvements in memory, cognition, and attention as compared to the same non-enhanced ingredients and to placebo. So whether you approach it from a scientific lens or a consciousness perspective, it opens up a bigger question. How much of human performance is chemistry and how much is coherence? You can check them out at igniton.com and use code ASHLEY for 15% off your order. That's igniton.com and use code ASHLEY for 15% off. Thank you. Aaron Abke, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you for having me on, brother. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love to dive into these things right out of the gate. So for those in our audience who are not aware of your work and what you're doing, could you just take a second to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about 4D University?
Sure, yeah. So I guess I'm mostly known as a YouTube spiritual teacher, and I focus mostly on modalities pertaining to spiritual growth, spiritual ascension. So there's been a number of texts that have really influenced me and the work that I do today. I would say I would put A Course in Miracles at the top of that list. I would put the Law of One at the top of that list. And of course, the teachings of Jesus, the gospel teachings of Jesus. And those are really my three primary influences, I would say. So I have an online academy that teaches people it's a Law of One modality, but it's called the Path to Fourth Density Graduation. And so the basic idea is that there are 7 total densities of consciousness that our souls move through as we evolve through our many, many lifetimes. And they correlate, of course, to the 7 energy centers. And so the Law of One explains that humanity is currently in the 3rd density of consciousness, which correlates to the 3rd chakra, which is the solar plexus chakra. And most people kind of typify this chakra as the ego chakra. So the Law of One says humanity is trying to make this transition from 3rd to 4th chakra, or 3rd to 4th density of consciousness, to move our consciousness up to the green ray energy center, which is the heart chakra. So humanity is striving to get beyond our separateness, which is ego, and into heart-based consciousness, where we realize our unity with one another, and we can actually create an enlightened civilization. So 4D University is my attempt to create a structured system of teachings and curriculum that help the student sort of walk them from, hey, you're firmly in 3rd density, ego consciousness. You want to get to heart-based consciousness. Here's how we can do it.
Awesome. Fascinating. I think your background also is, from what I've read, and I've listened to you on other programs and some of your own sessions on 4D and on YouTube. Something that resonated with me is, in your background, you come from a very strong, I think, Christian background, if I'm correct. Is that right?
Yep. Oh yeah.
And one of the things I've always been kind of dealing with as I've grown up and gotten wiser is, when I was little, I was always very confused about the fear of God, and the spare the rod, spoil the child, like this whole concept. It just never resonated with me. I mean, I was brought up in a Methodist and a Baptist upbringing, and church every Sunday, vacation Bible school in the summers. And I just never got it, because it was, why would I want to be scared of God? Like, why would it just never made any sense to me? And I just wonder, like, with your background, does any of that, is that common in what your transition as well? Or tell us a little bit about how you got from that upbringing into, thinking about spirituality in a very different way.
Yeah. Well, I was informed by, the pastors and church leaders and Christian friends that I trusted, that the reason these things didn't make sense to me or resonate with me is because I'm a heretic and I was born evil and I'm just not capable of understanding the mysteries of God. Why does God have to slay the innocent to absolve the guilty? Well, that doesn't make sense to you because you're a heretic. And if you were just holy and pure like I am, you would understand why it makes sense that God has to do an evil act to create good in the world. And so maybe the same is true for you. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess so. So I'm a heretic.
You and me both, brother.
It was
it's better to be called a heretic than to bury your mind in the sand, right?
Totally, right. And I feel like I'm closer to God and have a better relationship with God than most of the people that I grew up with that were talking about that, right? Or it just seems so strange, and I'm so thankful for that, for my own, I guess, realization and being strong in myself to be able to look at it differently.
Yeah. I saw a survey not too long ago. It was just like a questionnaire type survey, but it was asking Christians, what percentage of Christians would say that they feel the presence of God on a regular basis, on a day-to-day basis. And it was only something like 20-something% said yes, and 70+% said no, I don't experience a tangible sense of God's presence as a regular thing in my life. And I was so sad seeing that, because I remember being a Christian, and thankfully the church that my parents grew up in was very spirit-filled and non-legalistic. We had our legalism, of course, but we didn't stress hellfire damnation stuff. It was really all about the love of God, the love of Jesus, forgiveness. And we did, just the most epic worship sessions ever, every single Sunday. And so I was very used to being immersed in God's presence. And so I went through, like any typical Christian, we call them dry seasons, where you suddenly don't feel the presence of God. So that was a common thing for me, especially as I got older. But even as a Christian, I had a pretty strong sense of God's presence on a day-to-day basis. And now, if I were to take that survey, I would say, every day is saturated with God's presence. And if I'm a heretic, someone has to explain to me why I feel so incredibly close to God, and why I sense and see the Christ in everyone that I meet. And I truly feel a sense of innate natural love and connection to every person I meet, just as Jesus said that we should. And so I would imagine that, a more fundamentalist Christian would say, well, brother, it's because you're being deceived by a demon who's pretending to be the presence of God or whatever. And to that I would just say, okay, then just please leave me alone to my delusions, because I'm enjoying it,
Right. So I'm interested in what gave you the confidence to kind of move in the direction that you've obviously taken and are thriving in? Like, what was there a moment where things just clicked differently for you, or was it a gradual evolution?
Yes to both, I would say. I I think it probably has a lot to do with some past life stuff, if I'm being honest. But when I go back through my memories of leaving Christianity, I often will talk about the the one moment that really was the straw that broke the camel's back. There was three big moments that did this for me that were these huge cognitive dissonance sparking events, But the third and final one was when, to make a long story short, a homeless person that was sleeping on the steps of the church I was working at 23 years old. I got my first full-time worship pastor role after graduating from ORU with a bachelor's in music and theology. And I'm working as a full-time pastor, and we're in downtown San Jose in the Bay Area, which is a very dense urban city. And there was homeless people everywhere. And there was a homeless guy sleeping under our steps in a sleeping bag and kind of talking to himself and stuff. And so I wanted to go pray for this guy, and I wanted to give him some lunch. So I grabbed my lunch and I was heating up like a hot pocket. I had no health awareness back then. And I was going to go feed this guy my hot pocket and then pray for him. By the time I get out there, my pastor had called the cops, I guess, because this guy was strapped to a gurney and he was being kind of carted out of the church auditorium. And there was police there and paramedics who were taking him away. And this guy was cussing. I don't know if I'm allowed to cuss on your podcast, am I?
Go ahead. Yeah, that's fine.
I'm quoting somebody, so it's safe.
Right, there you go.
He was literally saying, he was like, "Fuck you, church motherfuckers," over and over. And my pastor was like, "Oh, I can't listen to this swearing in the house of God." And I was just so sick to my stomach with the hypocrisy and the impiety of the moment. And I'm just thinking, like, we are just the biggest hypocrites ever. And so I already knew in my mind at that moment that I was quitting my job. That was the third and final straw for me. But I kind of flew off the hip and said, like, I was like, no, he's right, Pastor Nanda. Let him say it. That's exactly what we are. And even the cops were like, "Come on, brother, don't leave that for outside, not in the house of God." And I was just like, dude, this is so fake. I can't do it. So I'm like, no, he's right. That's what we are. And my pastor goes, "What did you say, Aaron?" And I said, he's right. That's exactly what we are. I doubled down. And he's like, "Meet me in my office." And I'm thinking, like, I would love nothing more. And went up to his office, and I think he was thinking he was going to scold me. And I just went into like an angry tirade and just let him have it of like, "I don't believe this crap. This is a bunch of hypocritical Christianity. I don't believe anything you teach on Sundays. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. You got to find a new worship pastor." So I guess like that was the moment that I fully accepted to myself, I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to lie to myself and pretend I'm a Christian anymore. There was a lot of things that led up to that, but from there forward, it was like, it was never a decision of, oh, I'm going to go be the champion of true Christianity or the true teachings of Jesus like I am today. It was just like, I can't bear knowing that I believe something that's not true, and what's true really matters. And so I'm going to just keep speaking what I think is true because that feels like the right thing to do. And so I'm in all these Facebook debates and stuff for a couple of years, and I had every Christian friend. I didn't know anybody that wasn't Christian, so I lost every single friendship I had. And everyone's like, "Aaron, you're a heretic, you're a backslider, repent." And I'm like debating them on Facebook. So it was a really dark period in my life, but it sparked an inevitable spiritual awakening where I came to understand more of the things that I understand now. Because leaving Christianity, as anyone that leaves a cult, it's painful and disorienting and very upending to your worldview. So I went through a few years of like, I don't know what I believe about God. I know that the Christian God is not real. It's a fabrication of man's mind. But is there a God then? And I really hope there is, because I want there to be a God, but I have to be open to the possibilities, and maybe atheism is true. And it was actually near-death experiences that really rescued me from that season, because I thought, if anybody knows what's true about the afterlife, it's people that have died and come back to talk about it. And as Christians, we used to love near-death experiences. Of course, only the Christian ones, where people say, "Oh, I met Moses and talked to Jesus," and all this stuff. But when I started studying like average normal NDEs, I started seeing these repeating patterns, which probably most of your listeners are familiar with. Leaving the body, realizing that consciousness exists independent of the body, going towards a light, meeting the source, the creator of the light, which is all loving and non-judgmental, having a life review, seeing all the mistakes you made, where you didn't love people and you did harm to people, and then having a choice to go back and do it over again. And I just thought, now that's the perfect justice system. I could not improve upon that. It's really exactly what Jesus said. I will judge every man according to your works. And not everyone who calls me Lord, Lord is just going to automatically enter my kingdom, but only the one who does the will of my Father. And Jesus was clear. The will of my Father is this: love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And on these two commandments hang the entire law and prophets.
It's beautiful. I mean, and it's so simple, right? I mean, it's
Yep.
so much easier to understand, and you can just feel it in your heart that makes sense.
Yeah.
Uh, so did you talk about Jesus. I mean, that's one of the things, his message, as I understand it, obviously I'm not as well versed in this topic as you are. But as I understand it from what I've read over my life, and his message has been just completely twisted and perverted. He didn't come here to be the center of Christianity and to be worshiped as Christians have done. Am I correct?
You sure are. And you're teetering over the edge of a gigantic rabbit hole, my friend, which we can go down if you want.
Well, I want to go just a little far because I'm very interested in this topic because I think, the division of religion is one of the biggest problems in our world, right? And it's my
Yeah.
God is better than your God, and it just frankly has never made any sense to me. And once I've kind of gotten away and I've read more about the true messages and the true objectives of Jesus, it's almost, when you bring his name up, it almost creates this division right out of the gate. And I think that's
Yeah.
just sad, because his message of what you just said, of love your neighbor, is really what it comes down to.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Christian history is nothing at all like we've been told. I mean, even if you just look at the basic claims of the Catholic Church, which is the oldest, Greek, Gentile Christian tradition on earth, the Catholics, and I think Eastern Orthodox as well, would say that Jesus appointed Peter to be his successor. Peter gallivanted over to Rome, started the Roman Church. He was the first bishop of the church. And then he passed down the papacy from there all the way down to today. And so they'll claim, oh, we have a Petrine papacy all the way back to Peter himself, the rock upon which Jesus said he'll build his church. So they kind of feign this apostolic tradition. Well, the truth is there's absolutely no proof or evidence whatsoever that Peter ever went to Rome, ever started a church. And there is undeniable proof, like this is not debated in any kind of scholarship, Christian or secular, that Jesus did not appoint Peter as his firsthand successor, but he appointed his brother James to be his successor. Jesus had 4 brothers, which are named in the Gospels. And James the Just was his second oldest brother. James the Just is also the beloved disciple, by the way, in the Gospel of John, who's never named by name. And we have, I think, at least half a dozen independent witnesses to Jesus appointing James as his successor. Secular historians, it's even in the New Testament, Paul, the book of Acts, the Gospel of Thomas, widespread attestation. James was the leader of the first church of Jesus in Jerusalem for 30 years. And so the Catholic Church basically covered this up and kind of tried to sweep this under the rug. And they tried to downplay James and kind of get rid of him from Christian history and stake everything on Peter so they could claim this apostolic tradition. But there is no connection from the Catholic Church to the apostles, because the first apostles of Jesus were called Nazarenes. And in fact, Jesus's name was not Jesus. It was Yeshua HaNotzri, which means Jesus the Nazarene. And church fathers and secular historians show us that the Nazarenes predated Christ. They were actually one of 2 major Essene sects of Judaism. There was the Essenes to the south of the Transjordan and the Nazarenes to the north. And the Nazarenes named themselves after the famous messianic prophecy in Isaiah 11. A shoot shall come up out of the stump of Jesse. Jesse's the father of David. A branch from the stream of David. So the word branch there is Netzar, which is the root word for Nazarene. So they were saying, hey, we are the branch from which the Messiah will be born. And Jesus was born into the Nazarene sect. And he basically was trying to reform Judaism. So to your point, he was absolutely not trying to start a new religion. he was opposing religious leaders left and right because they had corrupted the original law of Moses and the Abrahamic faith of his ancestors, which was just the 10 Commandments. And so there's a whole bunch of different files we can click on here, but suffice to say, Jesus corrected the scriptures many times, even in the New Testament we have today, which are highly polished and edited. But in the extracurricular gospels, like the Gospel of Thomas, which is actually older and has more reliable, in my opinion and the opinion of many scholars, is far more reliable historicity than the 4 canonical gospels. You get a very different Jesus in many ways than the Jesus that the Catholic Church portrays. And there's a lot of overlap between the Jesus in the canonical gospels and the Gospel of Thomas. I think Thomas shares about 40% of the same sayings of Jesus from the canonical gospels. But in Thomas, it's like Jesus is way more uncensored than he is in the canonical gospels. And you get this very like mystical Jewish rabbi who's speaking in these mysterious kind of koan-like sayings, which if you are a student of any kind of non-dual tradition or philosophy, you read the Gospel of Thomas and go, oh my goodness, these are some of the most brilliant non-duality teachings of all time. And I really think that that's closer to, that Thomas shows us a version of Jesus much closer to the actual historical man.
Yeah, I've read it recently, and I'm in the process of reading it again because it's so mind-blowing to me. And I talked to Greg Braden
I love
on
Greg.
the program a few weeks ago, and he talked about, we got into a little bit of this conversation, and the Gospel of Thomas is one of his favorite texts as well. And he talked about Jesus, bringing the fire of truth to our world, and that there, people kind of mistake Jesus as being this passive, weak figure, but in essence, he was very strong and rebellious in such a way of burning down the paradigms that existed with the fire of truth.
Yeah. And Thomas, he says, whoever is near me is near the fire.
Wow. So let's shift gears a little bit into the 3D and the 4D conversation and the transition that we're going through in this regard. Is it your belief that this is part of what the return of the Christ is and the Christ consciousness, or am I off base with that analogy?
Yeah, you're right on. I think we have to understand what Christ consciousness means, and when we use that phrase, what are we actually saying, right? So Jesus, Yeshua, was a man. And by the way, all the first disciples, unquestionably, no debate about this in scholarship, the first disciples of Jesus did not think he was God or the second person of the Trinity or any of that nonsense. They believed he was the Davidic Messiah, as the scriptures foretold, right?
Right.
And so they saw him as a man who was anointed by God, and specifically anointed at his baptism. And that's one of the many interpolations that give away how these things were changed by Greco-Roman scribes over the centuries, is that when Jesus is baptized by John in the Gospel of Luke, the older version of that passage, which is in a few of the oldest manuscripts like Codex Bezae, the voice comes from heaven and says, this is my beloved son, today I have begotten you. And actually the book of Hebrews quotes it the same way. And that actually is a quote from Psalm 2, verse 7, which is a messianic prophecy. You are my son, this day I have begotten you. So the writer of Luke, and I think Mark as well, was trying to say, hey, Jesus fulfilled the messianic prophecy in Psalm 2, verse 7. And later it was changed to, this is my beloved son in whom I'm well pleased, because Catholic scribes didn't want people to start thinking that Jesus became the Messiah at his baptism. No, he was pre-existent. He was the demigod who came from heaven, second person of the Trinity. He was always the Messiah, and he always existed. So they're changing the scriptures, right? So Jesus's first disciples believed he was a man who was clearly operating on a much higher level of consciousness than the average person. He was a sage or a spiritual master. And in fact, they call him rabbi, teacher, which is another way of saying master or guru in that culture. And so Jesus demonstrated fourth density consciousness long before our planet had become awake to this possibility. Jesus, in all of his gospel teachings, if you read through the gospels, right, and just read the red letters, like every single gospel teaching, every soteriological statement he makes, in some form or fashion, centers around love, the love of God, loving others. If you deny love, then you will be judged. If you give love, then you will be blessed and forgiven. It's always about love. And like I said, love God, love neighbor is the greatest commandment of all, Jesus said. So Jesus taught all these things, which are typical of fourth density consciousness, such as the law of reciprocity. So for a fourth density being, someone who's operating on that frequency of consciousness, it's innately known, like the sky is blue, gravity exists, the sun, rises in the east, sets in the west, that you always get back the measure you give out, right? We call this the law of attraction, the law of reciprocity. But fourth density beings are not capable of doing harm to others in the way that third density beings do on our planet, because they just know I'm going to get back the exact same amount of harm that I give out. So let's go about solving this problem a different way than just revenge and dishing out punishment, right? So Jesus taught this all through the Gospels in Matthew, Luke 6:37, judge and you'll be judged, forgive and you'll be forgiven. For the measure you give is the measure you get back. And he talks about this in parables. So Jesus, if you understand fourth density consciousness and you read the Gospels, it's undeniable. Jesus was a fourth density being walking among us. So in my opinion, yes, what Jesus said when he made prophecies like, ironically, Jesus says, if anyone says to you, they've seen the Christ in the desert, do not believe them. If anyone says they've seen the Christ in an inner room, do not believe them. For when the Son of Man returns, it will be like lightning flashing from the east to the west, which is his way of saying everyone will see me at once. It will be a universal return, right? Not one guy said that he saw me somewhere, now we have to believe that guy. And ironically, that's, of course, Paul, who I'm talking about. Paul claimed that he met Jesus, at least the book of Acts says he claimed this, on a road in the desert on his way to Damascus, right? Jesus appears in the sky and knocks him off his horse, strikes him blind. Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And that's curious to me because Jesus said, if anyone says they've seen me in the wilderness, don't believe them. But also, where do we have any evidence that Jesus would strike somebody blind? Because in the gospel, Jesus opens the eyes of the blind. And on two different occasions, he announces himself as the Messiah, both to John the Baptist and in the synagogue in Luke 4, he says, the blind see, the deaf hear, the lame walk, the poor have the gospel preached to them. Today, this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing. So when Jesus basically says, hey, here's how you know I'm the Messiah, the eyes of the blind are opened. And then he's over here striking people blind all of a sudden after he resurrects. Like, that's a little fishy. And then Paul also claims he saw Jesus in a private vision in the book of Acts in the inner room of the temple. And Jesus said, literally, people say they've seen me in an inner room, don't believe them. So really, Paul is where Christianity went astray and off the beaten path from Jesus's gospel. But I do believe Jesus was trying to preach and teach and demonstrate more than anything fourth density consciousness. Not that he would have called it that, but the kingdom of heaven, right, is kind of what he called it and said that kingdom is within you. It's literally within your heart. So I think that humanity is moving towards this universal consciousness slowly but surely. I think it'll probably take us many more centuries to get there. But things like the internet, social media that connect us so much from around the globe, now we can see what everyone's doing and thinking and saying everywhere at once. So there's a harmony and a unity happening. And we're all starting to collectively agree on what kind of planet we want and what we don't want. And so slowly things like war are going to make their way out of the collective zeitgeist because we're just not resonating with these old third density ways of doing things. And I think we're going to see more and more humanity demanding and creating a planet that is built on unity and harmony and cooperation rather than us against you and all of this. So that to me is the return of Christ. It's the lightning flashing from the east to the west means it's going to come all at once for everybody. And I think that's an evolutionary, gradual process. But nonetheless, the analogy Jesus gave, I think, is very poignant for that.
So do you think in your studies and your own just opinion, are you of the mindset that there's something physical behind this evolution and the shift in densities and frequencies? I mean, is this a change in, for example, scientists think that, some spiritual scientists anyway, think that maybe
Yeah.
the sun is changing and the light frequencies are actually allowing this evolution of frequency to change the density of which humans are operating in.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know much about um, the solar predictions or the way that that plays into this, but the law of one is very clear that every planet is like a living organism or a being that is also moving through the densities. So planet Earth, Mother Gaia, her density level is the sum total of all the beings living upon her. So in other words, when humanity reaches 51% or more of us are living more from fourth density consciousness than third, then planet Earth will technically become a fourth density planet, a very early primitive fourth density planet. But it's the analogy given is a color wheel. So yellow is the color of the third ego chakra. Green is the color of the fourth heart chakra. It's almost like we're bleeding through a color wheel of consciousness, right? And right now we're in that dark yellow portion where they're starting to become little shades of lime green in the color hue. And as we keep moving deeper into the green spectrum, the color green slowly replaces the color yellow, right? But right now we're in that intermediary portion where there's just a little bit of green starting to be detected. So the idea is that Mother Earth's, our planet's magnetic sphere will literally become magnetized to the next density of consciousness when enough of our population reaches that level. So it's very much being spurred on by the planet herself. And in the same way that we individually have to do shadow work, right? As I'm healing and trying to raise my consciousness, I have to remove the blocks to that, blocked emotions, limiting beliefs, unhealed traumas, and so forth. And so that can be difficult to have your shadows surface and have to reckon with your darkness. But we all have to do that. We have to go through that hero's journey. And in the same way, planet Earth has to do that as well. And so things like the Epstein files are a great example of this. Jesus said, "There is nothing hidden that will not be made known." Jesus said, "Be careful what you do in the secret places, for what you do in secret will be shouted from the mountaintops." And I think he was touching on a universal law that there is no such thing as actual true secrecy or privacy in consciousness. There's only a delayed revealing, right? Things can be hidden for a while, but whatever is hidden eventually has to come to the surface. And we know that this is true for our own individual consciousness, right?
Right.
Whatever I'm suppressing, it's going to keep surfacing, whether I want it to or not. And I can only choose how to deal with it when it surfaces. And so I think humanity is starting to see a lot of the demons in our closet, and we have been for a while, learning about the horrors of big pharma and the military industrial complex and all the corruption of the people that run our world. And we've kind of co-created
everywhere
this,
you look, right?
Everywhere you look, and it's like, well, we voted for these people, so who do we really have to blame? So that's a hard revelation, but we're now seeing some of the darker shadows, which I think is that, if I had to summarize it, I would say the Epstein files, I think, have been a great revelation for humanity to realize that our planet has been and is being run at the top positions of power by deeply negatively polarized individuals who are, again, choosing the negative polarity of consciousness, which we haven't actually talked about that yet, but evil, in other words, because it makes sense that people who want to go down the negative polarity of consciousness, well, that's the opposite of the positive. So it means that's the opposite of unity and harmony and cooperation. It's all about service to self. So people that have a penchant for power are attracted to that polarity. And so it makes sense, doesn't it, that all of the highest positions of power and influence in our world would definitely be sought out by the most evil people in our world. because good people don't seek out positions of power until and unless they have to replace the evil people, right? So I don't think
Right.
it should be a surprise to us that evil people run the world. And even that's like, I don't want to create a limiting belief when I say that. There's very few of them compared to the positive beings on our planet, but we've got to start taking back these positions of power and at least occupying them so that the most power hungry, negatively polarized individuals can no longer use these positions to control and dominate and enslave our planet.
Well, it's kind of tricky, right? Because I did your I am the field meditation this morning because I knew I was going to be speaking with you, and I wanted to, just kind of get into that zone. And
Nice.
it's really hard to think that, because I believe I am the field, I am the light I am. And
Yeah.
how is that possible that those people that are doing these things are all part of this field that we're all part of, right? That's the trickiest part of it, the whole thing, for me to grasp.
Yeah, it's naturally paradoxical. I think the best way to answer that question is always free will or the choice. And the law of one lays this out really well also. The law of one, I think, if anyone has questions about the nature of our universe, you got to study the law of one because I think it has the best cosmology going around. And what the law of one says about this idea is that the one infinite creator, which is their term for God, wanted to know and experience itself, as all spiritual traditions say. And so the question, who am I, kind of births the physical universe. And the universe is the response, the immediate answer to that question. I am this, and everything that could exist is born. And in order for there to truly be an experience of itself, there has to truly be a choice. And so, how do you create a choice when there's only one being in the universe? So, what the creator did to solve this problem is it created the illusion of, and I stress the illusion of, the opposite of itself, which we could call the negative polarity. So, it splits itself into the pair of opposites, positive, negative, light, dark. And these pair of opposites, as long as they coexist as opposites, give birth to the entire physical universe. And so the law of one says third density, which is our current density level, right? The main purpose of this density level, every density level has a purpose, like a theme that defines that density. And the theme dictates when you get to graduate, right, to the next density, is when you successfully grasp that theme and surpass it. So the theme in third density is what they call the choosing. So the best analogy is chemistry, right? Every particle in chemistry has to have a charge, positive or negative, to do what's called work. Work means the ability to create change in your environment. So we are like particles in that regard, in that all of us have to choose a charge before we can continue past this level of our evolutionary journey. And that just, to me, makes all the sense in the world. It's like, which path do you want to walk on? Two paths diverged in a wood, right? And I took the one less traveled by. Jesus said, the path to life is narrow, and there are few who find it. Now, he's talking about the path to life on this planet, not necessarily in the universe, because the law of one makes it pretty clear that around 90% of all sentient beings in the universe choose the positive polarity, and about 10% choose the negative. So it's far, far less that go negative. But on our planet, it's different. It's a bit of a wild card, because in order for there to be a true, authentic, organic, uninfringed choice, the third density, all third density planets must have an equal amount of positive and negative catalyst, what they call it. So there must be an equal amount of light and dark to experience on this planet, because it wouldn't really be fair if this planet was just 90% light, almost everyone's enlightened and benevolent, and every so often you run around something negative, but mostly just light. It's like 99% of people are going to choose the positive polarity if that's the way it's set up. So the creator makes all third density planets having this equal balance of light and dark. So it's just as difficult to choose the light as it is to choose the darkness in this regard. And so choosing your polarity is the whole reason our souls come here. And your soul actually has to keep coming back here until it chooses positive or negative. And only then do spiritual gifts and abilities come online. And the gifts and abilities that come online is a bit different from positive to negative polarity.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's helpful for our audience as well, who may be struggling with some of the same questions. Shifting gears a little bit, many of the spiritual traditions talk about, as part of this field, they talk about prana or chi or life force. How does that fit in? And do you see these as literal energetic phenomenon, or is it a metaphor, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, it's very real, I think. Excuse me. We are frequency, we are energetic beings. And this is actually, by the way, what density refers to. Is density refers to the rate of vibration of the photon. So the idea is that at every density level of consciousness, there's a greater ability for consciousness to express itself. So like if I have a particle over here that's vibrating 100 times per second, and I have a particle over here that's vibrating at 1,000,000 times per second, this particle clearly has more density of light than this one does. So the more light that there is, the more information there is. Light is information. And the more information there is, the more ability consciousness has to express itself. So to give you some context, the first density is the root chakra density, which they call the density of beingness. So that's the 4 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space, if you like. And in the universe, when the universe is born from the next big bang that happens, consciousness spends billions of years in the first density alone, where stars, gas and dust coalesce into stars, and then planets start forming around those stars. They condense, oceans form, and then eventually, after billions of years of these 4 elements interacting, you get the second density of consciousness, which is like any organism that can move within the environment. So that would be like microbial life, something like that would be the first type of second density. And so now the photon of consciousness is vibrating fast enough that consciousness no longer is just the environment, but it's an organism in an environment, and it's navigating through an environment. So there's a kind of individuality being born, right? Now, animals, everything from insects to plants to animals, is the second density of consciousness spectrum. So that's the second chakra, the sacral chakra. And then it's only when an entity is able to do this amazing thing that at some point in our past, ancient hominid humans did, which is where your mind is able to flip in on itself and become an object to itself and know, oh, I exist. I'm a separate individual being in this universe. That's the beginning of third density consciousness. So they also call third density the density of self-awareness. And that self-awareness begins as separation. I'm alone, I'm separate, I'm lacking, and I have to get my needs met. And so then the ego is born. But really that flip happens from second to third, I think, from the advent of language, when ancient hominids, or whatever the heck we were, started using language which would have been probably like monkey sounds and guttural noises, right, at first. But they would have started using specific noises to refer to things: rock, banana, water, tree, whatever. And after thousands of years of that, they would be using noises to name each other, and each hominid in the group gets a name. And so like, think about what would happen when you get a name as an animal. You start to be able to self-reference, right? I can reference the concept of a rock, a banana, water, danger, safety, and I am also a concept in my environment. And that's what I think creates the bridge to self-awareness. And so the photon just keeps vibrating faster and faster as the densities progress. And so extraterrestrial beings, for example, fourth density beings would be extraterrestrials to us. They come here in their UFO craft or whatever. They can speak with telepathy. They can levitate objects. They can do all kinds of things that are godlike to us. But if you look at what we can do compared to a second density animal like a dog or a cat, like, we are absolutely the same degree of godlike to a dog or a cat as an extraterrestrial would be to us. A dog or a cat is not going to be able to cook lunch or dinner. It can't have a conversation. It doesn't understand what the economy is, technology, on and on we go. So there's as much of a difference between a dog and you as you and a fourth density extraterrestrial being, if you can believe it. And that's because their energy, their photons that make up their entire cellular makeup are vibrating that much faster than ours, that there's more capacity for consciousness to express itself. So yes, we are pure energy. We're pure energetic beings. And this is what raising your frequency really means. It's that the more you put a demand on consciousness to accelerate by releasing blockages and detrimental structures in yourself, and then accessing higher codes of consciousness, you're forcing your own photons to increase, right? And as more people do this, as the generations go by, we're going to upgrade our energetic frequency into that fourth density spectrum as well. And we're going to start experiencing things like telepathy, mind-to-mind communication, which some people can already do that, right? But I think it's going to be a normal phenomenon that more and more people start experiencing. And those will be the kind of hallmark signs that our planet is really moving into that fourth density spectrum.
Interesting. So I'm a part of a company called Igniton, and it's a quantum wellness company. And we're active in the biohacking space. And you mentioned earlier about being health conscious, and a lot of biohackers talk about optimizing the mitochondria and cognitive performance, and that's where Igniton plays as well. And the mitochondria actually are what gives off the light from our bodies.
Right.
Mystics talk about expanding awareness. What I'm hearing from you is, are these two paths kind of converging?
Definitely. Yeah. They're really not two different things. There's, the phrase, there's more than one way to skin a cat, I think is kind of the working idea here. Something that the law of one teaches is that consciousness at every density level must have a body that can house that frequency. So the body has to match the incoming consciousness that's incarnating into it. Right. So a fifth density, well, let's talk about fourth density first. Fourth density beings, we see this throughout like any ET documentary or researcher or, Dolores Cannon's work. Like, you always kind of hear ETs described in the same way, which is they have these super large heads, usually thin, frail bodies that are very weak physically, compared to us at least. Huge black almond eyes, tiny little mouth, tiny little nose, and big long fingers, right? You think, well, why would they look like that? Well, if you think about the way consciousness evolves, if we become telepathic and now we can communicate mind to mind, which, by the way, is the normal way of communication by and large in the universe. Verbal communication is a very rare type of communication in the universe. It's a primitive type of communication. Mm-hmm. If I can talk to you in my mind, why do I need to speak so much, right? The usefulness of the mouth is going to keep decreasing. Secondly, the more you raise your consciousness, the less dense matter you need to feed the body to keep it alive. And the more and more you can just take in light as your sustenance. And this is why beings who are very spiritually advanced will always gravitate away from flesh consumption and towards mostly fruit and plants and a very light calorie diet. Ramana Maharshi famously recommended that this was the best kind of diet for spiritual growth, because you want to just put the light codes in your body. And fruit contains the most amount of light codes, being that sugar is literally frozen sunlight in the form of crystalline sugar molecules. So we're going to need food less and less, is what I'm saying. And so, of course, the need for a big mouth shrinks. The mouth becomes smaller. We don't need to smell as much because we have all this crazy extrasensory psychic perception. Our magnetic field is sweeping our environment degrees of magnitude larger than our current magnetic field can. So we're picking up all kinds of data and sensory information from our mind alone. So we don't really need a nose as much. And then the amount of light spectrum we can see in the fourth density will be orders of magnitude more than we can see now. The law of one says a fourth density being can literally see the spectrum of your chakras in your aura. You can see the entire auric field of somebody, and they can sort of immediately know how advanced any being is spiritually based on the color spectrum of their aura, which is pretty cool.
Right.
So that's why the eyes have to grow larger to take in more light. And in the pupil, the black part of your eye, for us is very small because we can only see a very small spectrum of the light, amount of the light spectrum. But to a fourth density being, imagine how much more of the light spectrum they're seeing, right? So
Right.
this is the way the body has to keep up with the consciousness as we evolve. And by the time we get to the fifth density, the law of one says, the body is just a pure light body, pure electromagnetic energy that normally is just an orb, can just float around like an orb. And then through thought, they can appear as a being of light if they want to, which they often do. But in their native form, they're just like a little mini star floating around. And it's like, isn't that congruent with all the biblical tales of seeing angels, right? Beings of white light, brilliant beings of light. It's like, those are probably just fifth density extraterrestrials, right? That were visiting people in those days. So suffice to say, to your question, yes, the body has to keep up with the consciousness, and the body acts as a limiter for consciousness. So if your body is very sick and imbalanced and unhealthy, it is very, very difficult, if not impossible, to truly raise your consciousness. You need to get the body to a certain degree of working order to really be able to upgrade your frequency. And that's not to say somebody who's like bedridden, for whatever reason, couldn't still advance their consciousness. They could, but the body would not be able to keep up with them. And so likely the body would terminate them as its host for a number of reasons, but mostly so that that consciousness can go reincarnate into a new body that can actually keep up with its progression.
Well, I wonder, maybe you just answered my next question, but I'm intrigued by your perspective on longevity, because the big focus in the biohacking community and in general about extending lifespan. I'm wondering, is that aligned with spiritual evolution, or is it in a conflict with that, or what are your thoughts there?
No, big time. Yeah. This is one of the premier things I think we need to do as a species to help our planet evolve faster. We have got to extend our lifespan. We are living such short lifetimes that it's very easy for the negative polarity to continue controlling our planet, because the law of one describes this as the term they use is catalyst. A catalyst just means any experience you have, any event, any moment is a catalyst for your awakening and ascension, if you can become aware of the spiritual lessons being offered to you, right? So everything you experience in life is asking you to learn something or integrate something. And so if we only live, 60 to 70 years, that's just not a whole lot of life experience to be able to gain enough catalyst to truly evolve into the fourth density. I mean,
Right.
Just think how evolved you would be if you lived to be 250 years old.
Yeah.
That's an unbelievable amount of life experience. And we know that age brings a natural kind of enlightenment with it. This is a natural law designed by our creator, that the longer life you live, the more wisdom and enlightenment you gain. So it is to your benefit to try to live the longest life possible. And in fact, this is actually the origin story of the law of one. They said that the being that's being channeled in the law of one is called Ra. And Ra said that they came to the Egyptians about 12,000 years ago because the Egyptians were stuck in this perpetual spiritual childhood, because the average age or lifespan was about 30 years in that time. There was a lot of disease and stuff, and they just weren't living very long. And so they couldn't evolve. They were just stuck at this level. And so because the Egyptians were pantheists and they believed that the creator is in everything, they didn't see it as an infringement of their free will to contact them and communicate with them, because according to them, that basically is the truth. The creator is the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth. Everyone is the creator. So they started giving the Egyptians the important information and knowledge for how to extend the human lifespan. And one of the ways they did it was by building the pyramids. They say that the Giza pyramids were actually designed to be twofold, to serve a twofold purpose. Number one, to be healing centers, and number two, to be an initiation center. So we have the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber, right? I can't remember which one it is, but I'm pretty sure the King's Chamber is the initiation center, where they have a little box. It's still there today. You can go visit it in Egypt. You would lay in the box, which is like this resonating chamber. You can speak or sing, and it resonates really strongly, even thousands of years later. And they have these openings in the pyramids that let in the starlight and stuff. But basically, they would initiate you into a kind of psychedelic experience of awakening and realizing unity. So they would put beings through this process to raise their consciousness. And then the Queen's Chamber was built for physical healing of the body. And it's all about the kind of sacred geometry of right angles and the different ratios between. There's different energetic points that perform different things, kind of like the chakras. So they explain all this in the Law of One, and they were trying to extend the lifespan of the Egyptians. Now, the Egyptians named this extraterrestrial race that was communicating with them, they called them Ra, which is, of course, the sun god in Egypt. And Ra accepted this name because it's their free will. Hey, you want us to be Ra? We'll be Ra. So they don't consider themselves Ra. What they are is a planetary civilization from the planet Venus, which evolved about 2 billion years prior to our planet. And interestingly, in 2019, NASA figured out that about 2 billion years ago, Venus was the Goldilocks planet and was in that Goldilocks zone to have water and life, and probably had life on it for quite a long time, which lines up perfectly with what the Law of One says from back in the 1980s. So all that to say, the lifespan is super important for the planet evolving. If the negative polarity can continue to poison our food and our water and our air and environment and keep us sick, humanity will be stuck in the same kind of perpetual childhood. And I think we kind of see this, right? Like most people that die in their 60s and 70s these days from cancer and heart disease, they're not going out in a good place spiritually. They're usually full of fear and anger and confusion and depression and not even wanting to live anymore. Like this is a brutally difficult planet to live on right now, in large part because of how sick everybody is. And this is an intentional design by the negative polarity as one of their many ways of keeping power over this planet, because they know very well if the average human lived to even be 100 years old, it's like, think about all the different world events you would have seen by 100 years old. You would have seen every war strategy, every little thing the military industrial complex does, all the lies they tell to justify wars, all the tricks of politicians. Like there'd really be nothing you weren't privy to at that point. And so again, it's to their advantage to keep our lifespan shorter. And last thing I'll say about this is that, interestingly, the Essenes, which is the sect of Judaism that Jesus unquestionably emerged from, they were also privy to this. And they had actually split off from Orthodoxy probably around 500 BCE after the Babylonian captivity. They said, look, we can't rock with this pagan practice of animal sacrifice anymore. All the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, Amos, all the prophets are condemning this as an abominable act that God never commanded. And so the Essenes represented this portion of Judaism that said, no, we're not going to perform blood ritual sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins. Moses did not command this to us. And they went out to the Transjordan and started their own kind of ascetic, mystical sect of Judaism, where they practiced keeping the 10 Commandments and almost obsession with physical health, because they understood, hey, if we want the Messiah to incarnate among us, we have to extend the human lifespan and give the Messiah a body that it can actually harness all of the spirituality that this being is going to bring to our planet. We can't give the Messiah a sick, limited body that's only going to live to be 50 or 60 years old. So if you can believe it, both Josephus, our most reliable first century historian, and Philo, our probably second most reliable first century historian, they both said individually of each other that the Essenes were living to be an average age of over 100 years old in the first century.
Wow.
Now that's more than double the expected lifespan of the day. I think it was in the 35 to 40 was the average lifespan of that time. And the Essenes are out here in the Transjordan living to be an average age of 100 years old. So there's people living to be 120, 140 in these communities. And if you can believe it, one of the dead ringers that Jesus and his group came from the Essene sect of Judaism is that our earliest historians tell us that after James, the brother of Jesus, was martyred, he had passed on the succession to his brother and Yeshua's brother, Simeon, who's also mentioned in the Gospels. And Simeon led the church for another 60 some odd years. And he was actually martyred as well in about 112 CE. And you go, wait a minute, how old would he have had to be martyred in 112 CE? Well, Hegesippus and Eusebius record Simeon's death. He was crucified by the Romans at 120 years old.
Wow.
And he was still leading the Nazarene Church of Jesus at 120 years old, which shows he had pretty good mental acuity. And this is the interesting thing, is that Hegesippus and Eusebius recorded that all of the Roman centurions were marveling at how much torture this old man could endure before he finally died. And that also shows you just how healthy this person was. So the Essenes also understood this connection, that the bodily health is one of the greatest signs of spiritual health, because as above, so below, as within, so without. You can't say, oh, I'm connected to the Creator, but my body's full of sickness and death and disease. No, the Creator is life and health and harmony. And so the body should reflect that, right? If we're truly raising our consciousness. And the body, when you do that, becomes one of the greatest, if not the greatest, aids to spiritual evolution.
No, it's fascinating. What a great answer. I'm glad I asked the question. That's very, very relevant, I think, to a lot of our listeners, and a lot of people that are out there thinking about how to live longer, but live longer in a better world, right? Live better and live in a better place as well. And to that point, I know we got to wrap up here, but one last question for you is, for anybody that's listening who kind of feels like they may be on the edge of awakening, if you will, or moving into this 4D level of consciousness, but they're just overwhelmed with the negativity that's out there, what would be the most stabilizing practice that you would recommend for those who are in that position?
That's a great question. I think it's probably going to be unique to each individual, of course, but are you familiar with the concept of egregores?
I'm not.
Okay. Egregores is a concept that's discussed a lot in Western Hermeticism and Theosophy. A better term for an egregore is a detrimental structure of consciousness. So the idea is that you and I don't actually have an ego, in the sense that, like, I have an ego, and then you also have an ego, and then everyone else also has their own ego. It's not quite like that. There's actually just one ego, which we could call the super ego or something like that, which is the sum total of all of humanity's consciousness put together. And that's because all minds are actually joined in the field of consciousness. We're really not separate minds. We are one great mind. And in this way, whatever sort of detrimental beliefs, like negative core beliefs, humanity holds, create these detrimental structures of consciousness in the astral planes, in the field of consciousness, which we can't see. But these egregores are responsible for what we call like the mob mentality and group think. Whenever many, many minds believe the same ideas, it creates a strong kind of binding force of consciousness, which almost acts like a black hole that pulls anyone who's near it, will be pulled into it if you're resonating on the same similar frequency. So I say this to say, we as humanity, one of the other ways we will transition out of third into fourth density consciousness is by slowly deconstructing these detrimental structures of consciousness we've built, like us versus them, like religion we mentioned earlier. Yeah. Religion is maybe the most powerful egregore because it, you see similarities in like Muslims, Christians, Mormons, Jews, like they're different religions, but they all believe the same detrimental ideas, right? We're right. We're the one correct religion. Everyone else is wrong and evil, and they must be converted or they're going to suffer forever. And that's a detrimental structure. That is not the universe that God created. Yet, if enough people believe it, it will seem to be the truth. So I say all that to say, we need to be very careful in this day and age, I think, not to watch too much news anymore. Like, it's good to be aware of what's happening in the world, but really we should focus on never feeding our mind on it, because we're actually getting pulled into these detrimental structures like us versus them, like sowing fear around world events and things. And then almost like the Matrix movie, right? Where you're plugged into the machines.
Yep.
You're getting plugged into these structures, which are feeding off your life force energy, your consciousness. And so you have less available consciousness to use for ascension when you're outsourcing to all these detrimental structures. So number one, I think, is like, do not let your mind be too influenced by the negativity, because really that's another psyop of the negative polarity, is make everyone believe the world is just this horrible, evil place where mostly evil things happen. It's like, wouldn't they just love us all to believe that? But nothing could be further from the truth, man. This is a kind of heaven planet we live on. And there's so much good and beauty, way more than there is evil and darkness. And that's what we should be focusing on. And so that's not really a spiritual practice as much as it is just something to be aware of and be mindful of. But for a spiritual practice, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think where I was going to take, from what you just said, is gets back to being thankful and just having gratitude for the small beauties that you do have in your life. And that then, my belief is, the more that you can vibrate at that level, the more magnetism you create for more of those types of things in your life.
Yeah, absolutely correct. You become what you behold is the golden rule. So I guess I'll close by saying this. I teach a number of these different practices in 40 University, and they're more so like philosophies, rules to live by, but they become practices as you put them into application every day. And I think the best one I would recommend to anyone is what I call the art of loving relationship. Loving relationship, to me, completely encapsulates what fourth density consciousness is. The idea is that all things exist in relationship. This is not negotiable and not deniable. Every single thing in the universe, period, exists in relationship to other things. The water in my cup, the air that I breathe, the thoughts that I think, even a star floating in space, it's in relationship to the space that's supporting it. It's in relationship to the cosmic energies floating around everywhere. Nothing exists in isolation. So if we know that, then we should be concerned with, well, then how do I learn how to engage in loving relationships? Because again, there's only these two choices, light or dark. And to choose the light means to choose, I want to be in loving relationship to all things at all times. To me, that's the best definition for enlightenment. Is enlightenment is an ability. It's not like a state of consciousness that happens to you, right? It's an ability you have to develop, and it's the ability to be in loving relationship with everything at all times. And so the path of the negative polarity is the opposite. It's unloving relationship. So how I would define these is that a loving relationship is giving and receiving. Love always gives of itself fully and authentically. It never withholds good or love, right? So you show up to give your best every day. Whoever's in front of me, I'm going to give them my best. And then the other side of the spectrum is receiving, which means accepting, right? I'm going to receive whatever happens to me today. I will resist nothing. I will complain and argue about nothing. Whatever happens, whoever's in front of me, I will accept it exactly as it is. And if you can do those two things, show up to give your best and accept whatever happens, you are in loving relationship with life. And your consciousness is on the ascension path, man. But the ego, the negative polarity, it thrives on inversions, right? The negative polarity can't create anything. It can only invert truth. And so the negative polarity takes relationship, which is giving and receiving, and it inverts it into taking and keeping. I'm going to take good from you, and I'm going to withhold or keep good from you. So what we should do every day, I think, I call it relationship work, but in my morning meditation sessions, I actually use muscle testing to do this. I'll say, am I engaged in any unloving relationships right now? And I'll muscle test my subconscious. And it's usually yes. It's okay. And then I scan for what is it? Is it a relationship with my own mind? Yes. Okay. Is it a certain type of thought? Yes. And so I'm in an unloving relationship towards my self-worth, let's say. Part of me is still withholding my self-worth, my value. And that's an unloving relationship, right? So I'll requalify that and practice being in a more loving relationship to my own self-worth. Or it could be a person, or it could be a life situation. But this is like the one framework that I think you can apply to anything and everything in your life. Am I in a loving relationship with this, which is giving and receiving, or an unloving relationship, which is taking and keeping? And the simple thing is, if you find that you're in some kind of unloving relationship where you're in a pattern of using, taking, withholding, then you just requalify it to, okay, how can I start giving love and receiving this person as they are? Take the taking and keeping pattern and requalify it to giving and receiving. And although that sounds maybe a little bit philosophical or something, it is the single best framework I've discovered to really survey your mind, your life, and see where you're out of alignment with fourth density consciousness, and just quickly get back into alignment through this kind of simple framework.
Fantastic advice, Aaron. Aaron Abke, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you come back sometime. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and I could keep going for another couple of hours. So hopefully we can do it again sometime.
I would love to, brother. We'll do a part 2 for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Aaron Abke, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Before we jump in, this episode is sponsored by Igniton, one of the most fascinating companies I've come across in the world of human performance and consciousness. What makes Igniton different isn't that they're just formulating supplements. They're working at the intersection of biology and energy. Like Tesla said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That's where Igniton stands out. It's quantum bioenergetics, and it works. Igniton products are enhanced using cold plasma and laser photonics technology to embed what they call ignitons, high-frequency subatomic quasiparticles, into nutrient compounds. The idea is to support greater biofield coherence and optimize how the body actually utilizes those nutrients. And what's interesting is that in university research, these enhanced formulations showed significant reductions on stress-related biomarkers like IL-6 or CRP or blood pressure, and greater improvements in memory, cognition, and attention as compared to the same non-enhanced ingredients and to placebo. So whether you approach it from a scientific lens or a consciousness perspective, it opens up a bigger question. How much of human performance is chemistry and how much is coherence? You can check them out at igniton.com and use code Ashley for 15% off your order. That's igniton.com and use code Ashley for 15% off. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Ashley on Nothing But the Truth for a Better You and Me.